At the very second, the heavy brass lid of the Zippo lighter slammed shut with a loud click, cutting off the tiny tongue of flame from oxygen. Clint, a Marine sergeant weighing just under 110 kilograms, was absolutely certain of one thing. The next 5 minutes would be the most fun event of his shore leave. Seattle, King Street train station, July 14th, 1960, 2 p.m. The heat was such that the air over the platform shimmered, distorting the silhouettes of the trains, and in this haze it smelled not just of red, hot metal and diesel fuel, but of concentrated male aggression. A crowd of soldiers on leave gathered around Clint, sweaty, drunk, tired of discipline, and thirsty for blood, and they watched what was happening like a free circus where the main clown was supposed to be a small Chinese man in a white tank top. You think this was an ordinary street squabble? You are mistaken. It was a collision of two worlds, two philosophies that should never have intersected in a single point of space and time. Clint wasn't just a soldier. He was the living embodiment of brute, unrefined force. The scar crossing his left cheek pulsed when he smirked, and his hands, covered in a thick layer of black hair, resembled the paws of a bear used to breaking spines without thinking about the consequences. In his right hand, that very lighter danced rhythmically. Click-clack, click-clack. This sound worked like a metronome, counting down the seconds to inevitable violence. Clint looked down at Bruce, and in his eyes one could read the total derogatory superiority of a predator who had cornered a harmless victim. For him, having gone through the hell of real war, all these martial arts were nothing more than beautiful choreography for cheap action movies, dances in pajamas that crumble to dust at the first strike of an army boot to the groin. But why didn't Bruce leave? Why did he stand there, in the center of a hostile circle, as if not noticing the mountain of muscle looming over him? Any normal person possessing a self-preservation instinct would have long ago dissolved into the crowd of passengers, avoiding conflict with a drunken military machine. But Bruce Lee was not normal. He stood absolutely motionless, his arms relaxed at his sides, and his breathing remained even, as if he were meditating in a garden, rather than being at the epicenter of a brewing fight. You look at him and think, is he crazy, or is he just in shock from fear? This is the very question that makes you glued to the screen. We are used to seeing heroes who immediately drop into a beautiful stance, let out a battle cry, and scare the enemy with their appearance. But here everything was different. Bruce looked bored, and it was this boredom, this frightening calm amidst the storm, that began to irritate Clint more than any insults. The soldier took a step forward, invading Bruce's personal space. The smell of cheap whiskey and stale tobacco hit the future legend's nose, but not a single muscle on his face twitched. Clint expected a reaction. He craved to see fear, that sweet fear that appears in a victim's eyes before the slaughter. But instead of fear, he saw a mirror. In Bruce's black pupils, it wasn't a frightened kid reflected, but Clint himself, sweaty, heavy, and predictable. This enraged the sergeant completely. His ego, inflated by alcohol and the crowd's support, demanded immediate satisfaction. He gathered a mouthful of saliva and spat heartily, with force, onto Bruce's shoe. The thick sludge spread over the black leather of the shoe. The crowd exploded with laughter. This was the point of no return. In any bar in the world, such a gesture means only one thing. In a second, bones will start breaking. You think Bruce rushed into the attack? You think he wiped off the spit and struck? The Santa Barbara effect in action. What happened next completely broke the script of a street fight. Bruce slowly lowered his gaze to his shoes. He examined the stain with such interest as if it were a rare species of insect. Then he raised his eyes to Clint, and at that moment the lighter in the soldier's hand froze. Click. The lid remained open. Bruce smiled, but it wasn't a smile of politeness. It was the smile of a surgeon who picks up a scalpel and realizes the patient is already under anesthesia, even though the patient himself still thinks he is healthy. You rely too much on what you see, soldier, Bruce said in a voice that was quieter than the noise of the trains, but cut through the station's hum like a razor. He began to slowly unbutton his shirt. Why? Is he surrendering? Is he undressing before a fight? Or does he know something these 100 people around don't? Clint frowned, squeezing the lighter in his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't know that this piece of brass, this symbol of his self-confidence, would in a minute become the most important detail in a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. The shirt fell onto the dirty concrete of the platform, raising a small cloud of dust, and at that moment the crowd of soldiers, expecting to see a mountain of muscle, buzzed with disappointment. Under the white fabric, there were no massive biceps like Schwarzenegger's, nor chest muscles capable of cracking nuts. Bruce Lee, in his thin tank top, looked wiry, lean, almost fragile against the background of the 110-kilogram giant, and this visual discrepancy instantly lulled Clint's vigilance. You think the soldier got scared? On the contrary. A thought flashed through his drunken brain. Is this it? Is this the master they talk about? He felt relief bordering on euphoria, for in his world strength was measured by volume, not density. Clint clicked the lighter again, and this sound sounded like a chuckle. He was already mentally celebrating victory, imagining how he would break this dancer in half like a dry twig. But he made the classic mistake of an amateur. He looked at the wrapper, ignoring the content. If Clint had been sober and attentive, he would have noticed not the lack of mass, but the unnatural, almost anatomical definition of Bruce's latissimus dorsi muscles, which resembled the wings of a cobra ready to strike. But Clint saw only easy prey. "Hey, kid, did you forget your armor at home?" he growled, and the crowd exploded with laughter, supporting their leader. The sergeant took another step forward, closing the distance to critical. He wanted to intimidate, to crush with authority even before the first blow. But Bruce did something that made the laughter stick in the spectators' throats. He didn't drop into a stance. He didn't raise his fists. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, as if flipping a switch inside himself, and uttered a phrase that seemed like the ravings of a madman to everyone present. Eyes are just lenses. They show you what you want to see, not what is really there. What did he mean? Clint frowned. Philosophy at the train station? This was starting to annoy him. He wanted to fight, meat, blood, not lectures on Zen Buddhism. "Shut up and fight," he barked, clenching his fist so hard that the brass Zippo lighter dug into his palm, turning into improvised brass knuckles. You think Bruce finally accepted the challenge? You expect a classic sparring match to begin now? Get ready, because right now that very Santa Barbara effect will occur, which will overturn your concept of street fighting tactics. Bruce Lee, standing facing the enraged giant who had already raised his hand to strike, made a 180-degree turn. He turned his back to Clint. The station froze. The rumble of trains seemed like a distant echo. 100 soldiers who had seen much in their time, from drunken stabbings to artillery barrages, were struck dumb. In the street code, in prison rules, and simply in the logic of survival, turning your back to an enemy means only one thing: death. It is suicide. It is total capitulation. Or is it the highest degree of disrespect? Clint froze, his brain spinning its wheels, trying to process what he saw. He expected fear, defense, flight, anything but an exposed back of the head. Bruce stood absolutely relaxed, his arms hanging along his body, exposing his kidneys, spine, neck, all the most vulnerable points. "Attack when you want," Bruce threw over his shoulder, not even turning his head. His voice was calm, casual, as if he were ordering coffee. "You have the advantage. You have the element of surprise. You have the strength. Kill me if you can." It wasn't just a provocation. It was a slap in the face that made Clint's vision go dark. His face flushed crimson. The veins on his neck bulged to the thickness of a garden hose. He felt not like a predator, but like a fool being mocked by a child. Rage, hot and uncontrolled, flooded his consciousness, displacing the remnants of caution. "You asked for it, freak," he hissed, and there was more threat in this whisper than in any scream. He hid the lighter in his fist, deciding not just to hit, but to maim. He saw Bruce's open neck. He saw the point where he needed to strike so that this insolent man would remain an invalid for life. You are asking yourself right now, what is Bruce counting on? Does he really believe he will have time to react? After all, he doesn't see the opponent. He doesn't have eyes in the back of his head. Is this madness or a genius calculation that we cannot yet understand? Clint waited no longer. He braced himself, his heavy army boots with ribbed soles biting into the asphalt of the platform, preparing for a dash. This wasn't a sports start. It was the acceleration of a locomotive. 110 kilograms of rage went into motion. Clint pushed off the ground with such force that fine gravel sprayed in all directions. He flew forward, extending his huge claw hands to grab, break, destroy. The distance was closing with frightening speed. 3 meters, 2 meters. Bruce still stood with his back turned, not moving, like a statue awaiting demolition. The spectators held their breath, realizing that in a fraction of a second, the irreparable would happen. The impact is inevitable. There is no salvation. Or are we not hearing something? Something that Bruce hears in this chaos of sounds. The world around them ceased to exist, collapsing into a narrow, vibrating tunnel where the only reality remained the rhythmic, increasing thunder of army boots on concrete. You might think that turning your back to an enemy is an act of suicidal pride or a fatal mistake born of arrogance. But in that fraction of a second, Bruce Lee was rewriting the textbook of human perception right before the eyes of the astonished crowd. He didn't need eyes to see the monster rushing at him with the grace of a freight train. The vibration of the platform under the thin soles of his shoes transmitted all the necessary telemetry to him: weight, z-speed, angle of attack. It was a sonar map, drawn in the language of tremor. Clint was already less than a meter away, a living, battering ram of flesh and bad intentions. His massive arms thrown wide like the jaws of a bear trap, ready to snap shut on the spine of the foolish little man who dared to mock the Marine Corps. The crowd of soldiers held their breath, a collective gasp, sucking the oxygen out of the air, because from their angle, it was already over. They saw Clint's shadow cover Bruce completely. They saw the sergeant's thick, calloused fingers practically touch the white fabric of Bruce's tank top. This is that very moment when your heart skips a beat, because logic and physiology dictate, as soon as a wrestler of such weight gets a hold, the fight ends with broken cervical vertebrae. You watch this slow-motion train wreck and mentally scream at Bruce, "Turn around! Duck! Do something!" But he remains a motionless statue of obsidian. Did he miscalculate? Will the legend end here, on a dirty platform, crushed by a drunken soldier? But then reality glitched. Exactly at the moment when Clint's fingers began to close, anticipating the warmth of the victim, Bruce didn't jump away. He didn't run. He simply ceased to be where he was a microsecond ago. It wasn't a jump. It was a shift. A ghostly displacement of body mass to the right by just 5 centimeters, so elusive that the human eye could barely register it. Clint, having put all the inertia of his 100-kilogram body into this grab, found his hands grasping only empty, heat-humid air. His brain, clouded by adrenaline and alcohol, couldn't process this data error. Where's the neck? Where is the resistance? The laws of physics Clint had relied on all his life suddenly turned against him. His center of gravity, thrown forward in anticipation of impact, now became his executioner. He was falling forward, collapsing into the void, but the nightmare was just beginning for him, because Bruce wasn't just dodging, he was loading a weapon. Without looking back, without a single visual confirmation, Bruce shortly, drove his right elbow back. It was a movement of terrifying precision, guided not by sight, but by the change in air pressure created by the body of the rushing soldier. Thud. The sound was sickeningly dull, as if a sledgehammer had hit a bull's carcass. The elbow perfectly entered the solar plexus of the stumbling giant. It wasn't the crunch of bones. It was the sound of total physiological shutdown. The air left Clint's lungs with an explosive, involuntary wheeze, whoo, as if his diaphragm had been paralyzed by an electric shock. His eyes bulged out of their sockets, almost touching Bruce's back, filled with sudden, absolute panic of a man who forgot how to breathe. You think that was enough? You think Bruce stopped there? No. The philosophy of Jeet Kune Do is efficiency, and leaving a 110-kilogram enemy on his feet, even if breathless, is inefficient. In the same fluid movement, while the elbow was still digging into the soldier's stomach, Bruce's left leg slid back, hooking Clint's ankle. It was a gentle touch, almost a caress compared to the violence of the elbow strike. But timing is the great equalizer. Clint was top-heavy, suffocating, and moving forward by inertia. The trip became the final period in the sentence of pain. The massive soldier didn't just fall, he flipped over. His legs flew up, his torso went down, and for a surreal moment, he was suspended horizontally in the air, staring at the soot-stained ceiling of the station. That very brass Zippo lighter, which he squeezed as a talisman of his power, slipped from his numb fingers. It tumbled through the air, flashing a golden glint in the sun, a silent witness to gravity collecting its debt. And then came the impact. Bam! The sound of 100 kilograms of meat and bone slapping against the relentless asphalt echoed through the station, drowning out the hissing of steam engines. Dust billowed around the fallen Titan. The vibration of the impact was transmitted through the souls of the spectators standing 5 meters away. Silence returned, but now it was different. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of disbelief. Clint lay there, his chest heaving in spasmodic jerks, trying to suck oxygen into his spasming lungs, his eyes wide and moist with the shock of a child who touched a hot stove. And Bruce? He was still standing with his back to the defeated. He didn't even turn around to look at the result of his work. He stood perfectly still, adjusting the strap of his tank top, as if he had just brushed off a pesky fly. But wait! Look closely at Bruce's hands. They are not clenched into fists. They are open, relaxed. Why? Because he knew. He knew the fight was over the moment the rhythm of Clint's steps faltered. He didn't need to see the body to know it was broken. The sound of the impact told him everything he needed to know. But is it really the end? Or is the soldier just stunned, and now, driven by berserker rage, will try to get up for a last, deadly lunge? The sound of air trying to break back into Clint's collapsed lungs wasn't just a wheeze. It was a wet, gurgling, grinding sound, resembling the sound of sucking water into a drain, and this sound echoed off the metal beams of the station canopy, filling the suddenly fallen silence. You think the fight ended the moment he fell? You are deeply mistaken, because the real drama was unfolding not on a physical, but on a psychological level, right now, while 110 kilograms of manpower writhed in the dust. Clint lay on his side, his face pressed against the scorching concrete, and through the veil of pain and humiliation, he saw not the boots of his comrades who should have rushed to his aid, but only blurred spots of light. His brain, accustomed to simple army algorithms, see enemy, destroy enemy, was spinning its wheels, trying to reboot after a fatal system error. Why can't he inhale? Why do his legs, which marched through jungles, feel like alien bags stuffed with cotton wool? Panic, cold, and sticky began to fill his consciousness, displacing the rage. He tried to move, scraping his nails on the gravel, leaving white furrows on the stones, but his body refused to obey orders. The crowd of soldiers, who just a minute ago were hooting and demanding blood, now represented a collective monument to shock. Laughter was surgically excised from their throats. They looked at the fallen leader, and in their eyes the same silent question was read. If he could do this to Clint without looking, what will he do to us if we intervene? No one moved. Fear of the unknown proved stronger than army brotherhood. And it was at this moment, when the tension reached its peak, when it seemed the air was about to explode from static electricity, that Bruce Lee finally moved. Slowly, without a single sudden movement, as if underwater, he began to turn his face toward the defeated opponent. Do you expect to see triumph on his face? The gloating smirk of a winner? You are projecting your emotions onto a man who has long gone beyond the ego again. Bruce turned, and his face was empty. Absolutely, frighteningly calm. He looked at Clint not as an enemy, but as a broken mechanism that simply stopped working due to improper use. Bruce took a step toward the lying body. Clint, whose breathing began to return in spasmodic jerks, saw the approaching shadow. His self-preservation instinct wailed like a siren. He flinched, trying to cover his head with his hands, expecting a finishing kick to the face. After all, that is exactly what he would have done. He squeezed his eyes shut, preparing for the crunch of his jaw, for darkness, for the end. But the blow didn't come. Instead of pain, he heard a sound. A quiet, metallic ring that sounded louder than any scream. Clink. Bruce didn't hit him. Bruce bent down. Why? What is he doing? The viewer at this moment leans toward the screen, trying to solve the riddle. Does he want to humiliate him? Spit back? Or maybe help him up, showing nobility? No. Bruce Lee wasn't playing knights. He was playing a teacher whose methods are cruel but effective. His hand reached for the asphalt, right toward Clint's face, but didn't touch the skin. Bruce's fingers closed around the cold metal. That very brass Zippo lighter, that very fetish of power Clint clicked before the fight, demonstrating his superiority, now lay in the dust, pathetic and useless. Bruce picked it up. He straightened, holding the lighter at eye level, and the sun breaking through the station roof made the metal flare with golden fire. Clint opened his eyes and saw his talisman in the enemy's hands. It was a moment of total inversion. The aggressor's weapon passed to the defender without being used even once. Bruce spun the wheel. Whoosh! The flame flared up, steady and calm, not trembling in the wind. Bruce looked at the flame for a couple of seconds, as if reading the future in it, and then shifted his gaze to Clint, who was still lying at his feet, trying to understand if he would be burned now, or just laughed in the face. You think you know what happens next? You think Bruce will just throw the lighter back? That would be too banal for a scene that must go down in history. Bruce did something that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened soldiers. He didn't extinguish the fire. He brought the burning lighter to his face, as if lighting an invisible cigarette, took a deep breath, and then with a sharp movement slammed the lid shut. Click. This sound was the final period in the dialogue that began with Clint's clicks. It was an echo returning to the source. Bruce didn't just close the lighter, he symbolically turned off the light for the sergeant's ego. He showed that control over fire and over the situation was now completely in his hands. Clint watched this, and in his eyes, fear was replaced by something else. Understanding, respect, or the total devastation of a man whose worldview was shattered to smithereens in 10 seconds. Bruce weighed the lighter in his palm, tossed it a couple of centimeters up, and looked straight into the eyes of the lying giant. At that moment, a silent conversation took place between them, louder than any words. "You thought fire is power," read Bruce's gaze, "but fire without control burns only the one who carries it." And now, when the viewer expects a resolution, when it seems the lesson is over, Bruce makes a hand movement to throw the object back. But where will he throw it? In the face? To the side? Or... The brass block described a perfect arc in the air, shining in the sun like a small comet, and this flight seemed to last an eternity until gravity finished what Bruce started. Thump. The lighter fell right onto Clint's broad, heaving chest, hitting him just above the heart, which was still trying to burst out of the ribcage. You think the sergeant grabbed it and threw it back? You expect his wounded pride to force him to jump up and try to strangle the insolent man with his bare hands. On any other day, in any other fight, that is exactly what would have happened. But today physics taught him a lesson that burned all aggression out of his neurons. Clint covered the lighter with his huge palm, clutching it not as a weapon, but as a lifeline. He felt the warmth of the metal heated by Bruce's hand, and this warmth was the only thing keeping him in a reality that had just crumbled to pieces. He looked up from below at the man standing over him, blocking the sun, and in this silhouette he no longer saw a dancer or a little Chinese man. He saw the absolute. Bruce didn't start lecturing. He didn't humiliate the defeated enemy with a lecture on morality, because words are cheap and experience is priceless. He simply looked at the crowd of soldiers standing around in deathly silence and uttered a phrase that sounded quieter than a whisper, but hit everyone present in the gut. Your problem isn't the rules, son. Your problem is that you fight with what you see, but the real fight ends before you've even taken the first step. Do you understand what he meant? He wasn't talking about mysticism. He was talking about perception. While Clint wasted energy on intimidation and visual effects, Bruce listened to the rhythm of his intentions. It was a sentence for the entire philosophy of brute force. Bruce turned around. He didn't wait for an answer, didn't check if Clint had learned the lesson. He simply turned his back to the man who a minute ago promised to break his neck, and walked away through the crowd. And here is where the most incredible thing happens. You think the soldiers stepped aside out of politeness? No, they parted out of animal fear, mixed with the awe people feel at the sight of a natural disaster. A sea of green uniforms parted before the man in the white tank top, creating a corridor of silence. No one whistled. No one threw a remark. Only the receding click of Bruce's shoes on the platform and Clint's heavy, raspy breathing behind his back were audible. Bruce dissolved into the crowd of passengers, disappeared into the haze of the July heat as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving 100 men at King Street Station who had to relearn how to breathe. But the story doesn't end with this walk into the sunset. If you think Clint just dusted himself off and went to drink more, you know nothing about the nature of catharsis. They say scars adorn a man, but the scar Bruce left on Clint's ego changed his DNA. Witnesses claim the sergeant lay on the concrete for another 10 minutes, staring at his Zippo lighter, which he squeezed until his fingers turned white. He didn't open it. He didn't light up. That day he quit drinking. It sounds like a cliché from a cheap novel, but reality is often banal in its greatness. Clint left the army a month later. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't look for Bruce with a gun. Instead, he enrolled in the Kodokan Judo Dojo in Oregon. Why? Because he understood one simple truth that Lee's elbow had hammered into him. Strength without control is just a way to kill yourself faster. Years later, already a coach, he often showed his students the old, worn Zippo lighter and said, "Fire is useful only when it is covered by a lid. If you let it escape, it will burn down your house." This was his legacy, a legacy born of defeat. And now, when the smoke has cleared and we are left alone with the facts, I want to ask you a question that will make your brain boil. We all admire the result, but let's be honest. Turning your back on a 110-kilogram killer is madness. The line between genius and idiocy is thinner than a razor blade. If Bruce had been wrong by a fraction of a second, if he had misinterpreted the sound of footsteps, we wouldn't know his name today. So what was it really? Was it the cold calculation of a genius who sees the world as a matrix of vibrations and sounds? Or was it suicidal showboating, a deadly risk for the sake of effect that just miraculously paid off? Don't try to sit on two chairs. There is no middle ground in this story. Either he is a god of war or a lucky madman. Go down to the comments and write your verdict, genius or psycho. And by the way, did you notice what Bruce did with the lighter before giving it back? He closed it, depriving the fire of oxygen. At what minute did you realize that this was a metaphor for what he had just done to Clint? I await your theories below. The discussion starts right now.